Hey everyone, this is me just doing this last extra video in the Advanced Object-Oriented Programming chapter. These actually aren't even mentioned in the chapter. I just like bringing them up because this is, in a way, kind of a more elegant way of writing getters and setters. It's called working with properties. So, yeah, it's just a way where you can set a function to become a property, and it allows you to access it without using parentheses. Essentially, it looks more like a traditional variable, but really what's happening is that you're running a function in the background. So let's just come down and see this actually in action. So we're going to make a circle class. And what we want is to have we want our circles to have a radius, okay? And we want our circles to have a instance variable of radius, but we're going to make this a private variable, right? So private variable, okay? So we could set it equal to be radius here. But we're actually going to do something a little bit different here. We're going to eventually change this up. We are going to write a function and just call it radius. Just self like this. And this is going to return our private variable. So the way this will work, in fact, we're going to change this up a little bit as we go. But let's say we make a circle. Let's just say circle object equals a circle with a radius of 5. So let's go through there. There's some more stuff this question is telling us to do, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's say we want to print out the circle object's radius. So normally, like let's say we didn't have this property, this wouldn't work because it's saying, hey, you don't have a variable named radius. You also don't have one named __ radius. Right, it gives us the same error. It's just saying, hey, this doesn't actually exist. Oops, I called it twice. Let me show you for sure. Yeah, this doesn't work, right? Because we made it private. That means we can only access this variable inside of the class. But the fun thing about using properties is it lets you create a function name, but it functions, no pun intended, as if it were just a variable. So when I say cObject.radius, it actually is calling this function and returning my private variable. Right? So it gives me 5, but it just looks much better. I can still make this private, but I get almost the functionality of interacting with the private variable without any of the annoyance of having to write a thing that says like get radius or set radius or anything like that. So let's actually add a setter, because this essentially turns us into a property, and this function is a getter, essentially, right? So when you have an at before a method, is called a decorator. It just adds some extra functionality. So the extra functionality it's giving us is it's allowing us to call this function without actually adding the parentheses there. So let's do that. Let's see what it says here. Make a setter called radius that will set the value of __ radius as long as it is a number greater than 0. Okay? So let's do this one. Let's say at radius dot setter. Okay, so that's just the you can only create a setter. Decorator if you first made a property. Okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to call this radius the same itself. And if you have a setter, it is going to need to have one extra parameter in here because we need to set it to something. So let's just say new radius here. And if new radius is above 0, right, then our self.__radius, our private variable, which we return of this, is going to be equal to the new radius. Okay. Else we could raise an error. Raise value error. That isn't a proper, or I don't know. Radiuses must be more than 0. They have to have a positive value, essentially, right? Okay, so now, because we're using a property, and we call this a setter, we can change the radius of our object equals 15. In fact, let me try stepping into it. 1, even though it doesn't look like I'm calling a function, I'm actually calling one, right? So that's kind of cool. We're just getting that radius. Doesn't look like I'm calling a function at all here, but if I step into it, that's pretty cool, right? So now I can add some data validation. And I can print, I can show that my new radius is in fact working here. It's going to give me 15. But if I were to do something like 0, try and run this, I'm getting an error, right? They have to be more than 0. Okay, so my data validation is baked in. Let's see, let's do one more of these. Also create a property called area that computes the area of the circle. So we have pi times self dot the private radius to the second power and returns it. Let me actually just copy this formula. It's just easier. Make sure you call the setter method when you first create the circle to make sure it's a valid value for radius. So I can do that actually. So let's do let's make a new property. And we're going to call this area. Self. What we want to return is this calculation. So pi times whatever the radius is times 2. So what that's going to let us do actually is 1, we don't have to use the parentheses. Okay. Oh, oops, that's working how I want it to actually. I don't want it to work if the radiuses make sense. So let's do 6 as our new radius. Why not? So we're over here. And notice that my C object, it's like storing this area here, but it's calculating it on the fly. I'm never just storing area as an instance variable directly. Every time I call area or I reference it, it's going to calculate it anew, essentially. I have a calculator property there, right? So it's giving me that value for the area. And if I were to change this at any point, if I were to change the radius, it would just give me a new area automatically because I'm calculating it from scratch, essentially. So that's pretty cool. The last thing it's saying is to make sure that when I create a circle that I'm actually validating it with my setter. So I could just make sure to, we could just say self.radius, which, remember, that's actually referencing the setter, is equal to radius. Actually, just put that equal to none. So we're making the instance variable here, and then we're actually going to set that instance variable here. So radius here is the parameter. Self.radius can reference either the getter radius or the setter radius. And because I'm trying to assign it, it's going to automatically call this setter radius. Okay. So this is just kind of an alternate. I think it's a little bit more confusing syntactically. You have to think about it a little bit more when you're first learning this. Like how to set it up for this to be the getter and this to be a setter. But I actually really like what it lets you do afterwards. I think this looks much cleaner than having a bunch of getter or setter attributes in there, right? So that is the last file actually in the advanced object-oriented programming, at least so far. Maybe in future semesters I'll make a change, but hopefully not. So thanks. Hopefully you found that useful.